Come on, you know how we start these things. It's a hello and welcome. I think this is episode 9, so take it away, Alan.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Split Screen Podcast.
More energy.
Hello and welcome to the Split Screen Podcast. We think it's episode 9. For strange technical reasons, our episode 8 is chopped up in bits in Craig's laptop, so you'll actually hear this before then. So it's like whenever episode 8 comes out after episode 9, it'll be like gazing back through time.
Yeah, it'll be a prequel podcast.
A prequel to the
completely unrelated though, so it's non-canon.
The Lost podcast, Jurassic podcast. So my idea was that I guess it was a big decision in my life lately, and then I thought about decision making in computer games, because that's what I do. I can only relate my life in terms of computer games, and so it got me thinking about how we'd never talked about game stories. So it was things like, to what extent do gamers control a narrative in the story? To what extent should they control a narrative? And obviously what follows from that is what actually makes for a good story.
Because that's one of the often used detractions against games being art, is that you can subvert the artist's intention.
Yeah, the directorial attention or whatever.
Yeah,
it is,
you can. You could play the passage, which we've talked about previously, by just walking left to right. You can never move down and explore where all the subtext and meaning is. But similarly, you could just stand still when you're playing Mario.
Have we talked about passage before?
You've written about it. We've not talked about it.
So I have in the world's longest article.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we can put a link to that in the podcast, because that's well worth a play. But I guess the point of passage is that you could wander straight from left to right, and you could do that in life as well. You could wander from left to right along life's narrative, never going down, never going up, never finding a spouse, never opening up the treasure chest buried in the maze. And that I think that was kind of part of the point of it.
You do relate everything to games.
That is a computer game about life. That's perfectly valid to relate that. So I guess within games there are a lot of different ways of telling a story, and the main obvious one would be the kind of Hollywood one where you have no control over the story. I guess an example of a decent story would be something like Portal 2, where you don't have any control over it. Yeah,
they've written the script. You play a character in their script. You play it very well. Good for you. And you move through, and while you know as much as the character, which I think is one of those things where I can get into that. I can be perfectly fine with the Hollywood script. Alan Wake, I think a game we both really enjoyed, and was exactly like that. I mean, Alan Wake did exactly what Alan Wake was told to do, and that was because the game was quite about a story in a story written by himself. So it's very confusing, but
very good.
But very good. But that can be fine. But that is, I think, largely when people think of stories in games, that's what I tend to think of. I mean, that's what we've got, all the Call of Duty single player missions, Bioshock, all that kind of stuff.
I think with something like Alan Wake, we'll probably come back to this later, but it's a story that's not actually a terribly good story, and if you wrote it down in a book, it probably wouldn't be that good. Yes. But it is the way that it's told that makes it exciting, and that's the advantage games have over films, is that they can put you into the shoes of the character. The problem I always have with something like, I don't know, Call of Duty or Battlefield, is that you don't really feel like you're that character. You feel like you're just watching them do things, and you occasionally pause to shoot the pop-up monsters. It's not the way I want a story to be told. And you get other games like, something like Final Fantasy is a good example, where the story's driven through cutscenes. Yep. So you play your game, and then you set the controller down, and then you get a break from the game, and then you watch the bit.
The game that you play is fighting monsters, isn't it? Somewhat. I'm thinking about it like Pokemon.
Yeah, no, you do fight monsters.
You're fighting monsters. You're choosing what spells you're going to use, what attacks you're going to have, in what order. Yeah. And then you get to your cutscene, and it's all about how the world is falling apart, and the romance of the character, and all of the angst and all that stuff comes out.
So you get your story after the game.
Yeah. That's your reward, in a sense. It's your
absolutely.
Part of the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, your reward for doing the gamey bits is more story bits.
You're rewarded with breadcrumbs.
So what Shenmue famously did, that is now possibly one of the most reviled things in modern gaming, is the QuickTime event, which is where you insert game bits into the story artificially. So Craig and I are sitting at a table. We've got our laptops.
Well, what are you going to throw at me?
I'm not going to throw in it. I'm just saying, if this glass of water were to precipitously fall off, you'd get a big button flash on screen. You press A to grab glass. Yeah. And what Shenmue did, which I thought was good, was, to me, Shenmue was about the story. and so it punished you for failing a quick timer event by breaking immersion and making you replay that part of the story. So that to me was, because you got so engaged in it, that was the worst punishment of all, was to make you do it again, because then you were reminded you were playing a computer game.
Yeah, one of the things in Star Wars Force Unleashed, actually, they had the quick time events, and they tended to be when you were about to land the final lethal blow to whatever enemy. So you've got the AT&Ts, and you're up there and you're whatever, ripping it apart with your lightsaber. And you would have then the quick time events, and that would be when you would, do the almighty sort of smash through the cockpit. But if you screwed up on the quick time event, the battle would keep going. It just meant that you would get knocked to the ground and you do a little bit more hack and slash, and then the opportunity would arise again. I can't remember whether it played a slightly different animation. So I think they built in that idea that, well, look, you're not going to get this right the first time.
Yeah.
And we're not going to let that stop our story.
I don't know if it definitely was in God of War, but I don't know if it was the first one to do it, because you had the first level, you're on the ship fighting the Hydra, and you have to you sling these hooks through its ears, and you have to ram it down into the ship's mast by mashing the button, and then you eventually just skewer it. But because it's a Hydra, you have to do that 3 times, and because it's a computer game, you have to do that 3 times. Yeah, each time slightly faster than the last.
The third time slightly more intense, and the weak spot was slightly harder to hit.
That was like the terrible ending of Arkham Asylum, where you fought Joker Monster.
Yeah, that was so bizarre, wasn't it? Why would you do that?
I don't know, but it was rubbish.
I wanted the end of that game to be one punch. You walk up to him and it's just bang, and he's down, and that would be it.
Getting slightly more on topic, one of the games I have in my pile of games to play is the new Deus Ex game, which is all about choosing elements within the story, and you can be lethal or non-lethal, and you can choose from multiple endings. But another thing it has was crap bosses sandwiched into the game, and they were actually... It was things like Deus Ex is a game where you don't have to kill anyone, and you can be very stealthy, and so you can develop your character that way. But some of these bosses, they don't care how sneaky you are, and they don't care how good a hacker you are. You have to shoot rockets at their faces until they explode. And it turned out that the bosses were actually outsourced to another company.
Oh wow! Okay.
Just the bosses, because presumably Eidos or whoever were working on it thought, oh, we'll better get some bosses in here, and it won't be a computer game without a big monster to kill. So that's interesting, but it's one of those games where you do have a couple of different endings, but it's quite limited agency. So it's something like Mass Effect or Knights of the Old Republic. Yeah. Did you play KOTOR?
I didn't play KOTOR. I was going to say, when you were talking about Deus Ex there, I was reminded of Metal Gear Solid 3, because that was a game as well, very similar, where you can go through and do lethal or non-lethal kills. Yeah. But with the bosses in that game, you can knock them out. Yeah, you use the tranquilizer darts, or you can use traps and things to actually take them down. I think they all tend to die of their own accord in the cutscene again. The usual thing where they're like, "You've weakened me," and then he stumbles off a cliff and shoots bees out of his mouth. But the one part of the game, the final character, the boss, you do have to kill, and that's one part where they switch back from a cutscene to the actual game, and you're in the middle. And you do actually have to press that trigger to actually pull those. So you can play through the game and not kill anyone, but you have to end the boss's life. And that's really crucial to the story.
Oh, okay.
That's an example. But yes, KOTOR. I've never played KOTOR. I bought it on Steam for about 50 pence and was like, ooh, I'm never going to play this. Yeah, I know.
The eternal struggle to play all these computer games before we get old and retire and we can't play them anymore because the plugs don't fit.
Do I buy this classic game, or do I buy a Kinder Egg?
That's
equal monetary value.
That's what it's come down to now. See, it's gingerbread latte season, so for me it's like I could buy a gingerbread latte or I could buy a cheap game. Well, I guess the difference is that a cheap game doesn't give me multiple chins. That's a decision making process. KOTOR does let you choose things, but it kind of augments that decision making process and undermines it. So you can choose elements of the story, like you can one of the characters. Let's just spoil the game. But part of it, one of the main characters wavers between going to the dark side or not, and you can influence them through the type of character you are and the things that you do. But it doesn't have a huge impact in the end of the story. There's a big baddie called Darth Malak. I'm really trying to avoid spoilers because it's got the mother of all twists. But whether you're good or bad, I mean, it's a BioWare game, so you're either good or evil. Save the baby all over again. You must kill him. that is how you finish the game. I've never actually completed that game. I've got to the very end bit and not finished it.
Was it one of those ones where you get down to like not enough health and you've been locked in a quick save type scenario?
No, it's one of those ones where the fight went on for too long and I already knew what was going to happen. I was going to kill him, it was going to roll the credits and play the Star Wars theme, and that would be it. So I don't feel like I played everything else. But it's kind of like, do you remember when you got, whenever DVDs first came out, and there's all these like 2-disc super hyper collectors mega edition?
Still doing that, I think.
Yeah, and Terminator 2 had an original ending where you saw Linda Hamilton's character and John Connor in the future, like 30 years after Judgment Day, and John was pushing this kid on the swing, and that was meant to be the end of Terminator 2, and that became this alternative ending because they cut it for one where there's that shot of them, the meandering road, and them saying, well, we don't really know what lies ahead, kind of thing. Yeah. Which obviously paved the way for Terminator 3.
Yeah.
That to me is what a lot of the storytelling in games feels like. It's like, just because the ending of Terminator 2 is different to how Cameron intended, it doesn't actually change the film, really. It doesn't change it that much.
It would need to be some really special reveal that changed how a character's motivations were in the past, but that doesn't. That's something, as you said, that's just forward-looking.
But it's like, that's 30 seconds of clip. And so when you play through 12 hours of game, 2 minutes of cutscene at the end don't really matter.
I think the best example of that coming to mind is Fallout 3.
Oh God!
Which they were lauding as having however many endings of the game, 50 endings, something like that.
I thought it was something ridiculous, like 1,000 endings or something silly.
And what they're saying is that we've got this game where there's branching paths and there's so many permutations that you can go through. But as you said, they don't all come out to a different game. You can play Fallout in very similar ways, but then have very large choices that you make concerning the main storyline, or how, again, whether you go the old lethal or non-lethal. It's weird how a lot of games seem to be coming down to whether or not you're a closeted psychopath or a kleptomaniac or a sociopath.
Yeah, whether or not you want to murder hundreds of innocent people. But
or just steal all their stuff.
But Fallout 3's was just so contrived. It was, the hero left the vault and he went to Megaton and he saved Megaton, and then he went to Tenpenny Tower, and he saved everyone in the tower, and then he went to the water purifier, and he
did not save
everyone. Dun 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 dun. Fallout.
Please buy DLC to play more.
Story continued in DLC. We will go to Mothership Zeta and kill/not kill aliens.
But for all the deviation and variety in Fallout 3's ending slideshow, where the story matters is in the actual game, and you can take yourself down different paths. You choose to ignore huge areas of the game. My first playthrough, I didn't go into the Washington DC area at all until I had to in the final 2 or 3 missions. I spent all my time exploring all the outlands
instead of the capital wasteland,
instead of the capital, say. And
that's interesting.
And it takes a certain amount of confidence for a developer to be able to let you do that and not feel that they have to show you, take you by the shoulders and show you every cool thing in their house.
Yeah, well, I mean, Skyrim's quite good like that. I got Skyrim last week, and it's kind of like riding through the Scottish Highlands, and there's lots of there's dolmens and there's caves you can see, but there's other things like these guys were just walking through the field, and I was like, what's going on here? And they sort of said, what are you doing? Go away. You don't want to get mixed up in this. And I was like, right, I've had enough of this shit. So, I whooped out the mace and the frost spell and killed them all. Just about survived. But there's other things like, there's bits that have nothing to do with the story. Like, there's these giants roaming through the wilderness, and they have these mammoths that presumably they harvest the cheese. You can collect the mammoth cheese if you want. But
that sounds disgusting.
If you try to attack them,
mammoth cheese?
Yeah.
You milk mammoths?
Yeah. Well, no, you don't. The giants do, but you can collect it.
Okay.
Try and attack the giants, and they'll just stomp on you like a ladybird, because you're beautiful, and they're not. And or you can just stare at them, and they turn around, and they just stare at you. And I was thinking, that's so weird. What are they doing? And that's the elements of story you get from a game like Skyrim or Fallout 3 or Oblivion. It's the wee incidental moments that make the game, not the cheesy plot of, you are the Dragonborn, you must travel to the 9 peaks of Shalafsar, or some nonsense like that. That's not what's important. What's important is seeing a dragon suddenly land in the path and having to kill it. That's the story to me. It's a story of your hero and your quest.
Yeah, and like that encounter with the troll, that choice of whether or not you engage with them in the first place to me, that's what matters more when I feel about when a game has variety. It's not whether I enter into a room and I can take the left or the right path. It's whether or not I have to choose either of those paths in the first place, whether or not I can do something else or move around. I was going to say Red Dead Redemption had these little incidental moments like that, where they programmed them in. So that every now and then, it was meant to be random, but it was random in that way where it happened basically every now and then.
Random, and you could see it coming, but you weren't sure when you were going to see it coming.
Yeah, where you would just be riding down the track on your horse, and a little flash would come up, and you would see someone wishing about either their wagon had been stolen, or maybe you come across someone who's been taken hostage. And you can either whip out the gun and save them, or you can lasso them and return them to a sheriff for a reward, or you can just ride on by and ignore it. And that was like much better than. But Red Dead didn't have any choices, but the sort of choices in Grand Theft Auto story, which were wholly arbitrary.
What did I describe it as? A world of unlimited, meaningless choices.
Yeah.
So you can do whatever you want, but it won't make any difference. You can no in New York City, no one can hear you scream.
Because you have that story that you have when you're not playing the missions. Yeah. And then you have their story with Nico and his interesting and wholly original rise from rags to riches.
Wholly original. But GTA is another one like that, where if you skip the cutscenes, it would just be a series of you driving cars and shooting men.
Yeah.
There's no story ever expunged through the fighting, and I think that, well, it might be some at the end, but it's the usual kind of, cheesy confrontation where they're shouting at you going, "Oh, Nico, you're a failure," while you're crouching behind a box, waiting to shoot him. It's all these bits that don't add anything to the story.
Yeah, you crouch behind that box. Nico, you should have given up long time ago.
I'm going to kill you now, Nikos.
But you're still crouching, so my dialogue will cycle through one more variation of what I've already said. Nico,
please come out of the box, Nico. I cannot go down there. I have bedback. But yeah, that's a very, I guess that is a very Hollywood approach. Something Metal Gear Solid, is famous for its incredibly indulgent cutscenes. Some of which are skippable, some of which are not. At least you can pause in the middle of them.
I don't. I just think if your cutscene is so long that I need to pause during it, then I'd rather sort of be watching a film with that time, like a proper film. Like I don't want to pause a cutscene. I'll skip the cutscene if I need to, because you already know if they give you the option to skip it, you're gonna be able to get through it.
I think the last cutscene of Metal Gear Solid 4 is like 45 minutes long.
Oh no, it must be longer than that.
Maybe it's an hour and a half long.
The last cutscene from Metal Gear 2, I remember being at least over an hour.
Really?
Yeah.
That's not a cutscene. That's a feature scene. Cut implies that it was kind of placed into something. not that it's the majority of your time spent.
If you want to make a movie, go make a movie,
But I think if it would need to be a mini-series. If it was a movie, it wouldn't be well told enough to be a valid movie on its own. But there's quite a lot of game stories that are actually not very good, and it's the way they're told that makes them good. I mean, a couple of ones that spring to mind for me. The first one is the first Half-Life, which is actually a terrible plot for a film. Imagine if you watched a film where there was a scientist who aliens were suddenly teleporting in for another dimension, and then he shot some of them, and then soldiers came in to kill him, and he shot some of them as well. You wouldn't want to watch that. It's crap plot. It's like a terrible B movie from the 70s. It's like Charles Bronson's Death Wish with aliens. But the point is, it's the way the story's told. It's the way you don't know what's going on, and you don't know that the military are coming until you see them coming. So it's all about the way it's told that makes it good, and that's why that story succeeds in a game, the way it doesn't succeed in a film. So Mass Effect 2 is another one. It's got a really cheesy sci-fi story where it's like, aliens are arrived and they're harvesting humans, so we better go kill them then.
Yeah.
Shepard, away you go. But again, because of the choices it gives you, it feels really unpredictable and compelling, and you're actually not sure if your team are going to survive the mission. And indeed, they don't necessarily survive, depending on how you've played through it. So it's a bit like the J.J. Abrams remake of Star Trek, which is a bad story, well told.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problems that can happen, you can have those stories, and with games as well, because you can have things that happen in the actual game. You can tell, as we've said before, stories with the environment. You've got Bioshock's Rapture. That city itself can sort of tell a story and stand on its own. You can tell things through text. You can have text entries in Fallout or in Deus Ex, say, where you can
Yeah.
pull up terminals and you can then get more backstory again.
Well, you can
So you've
hack
got-
into people's emails and see what's going on in the background.
And the audio clips again, which many games have used. Dead Space has used that again. You can have all these different ways of getting across characters and little stories and tell little incidental moments as well as leading into the greater grand scheme of things. But sometimes when you have all of that volume, it becomes really bloated. And when you have a game which is typically a dozen hours, 12 hours,
Yeah.
20 hours,
12.
Mass Effect, I mean, how long does that go on? Is that more?
It's about 12-15 hours.
12-15 hours,
No,
Half-Life.
maybe it's long. I don't know. Let's not guess. Half-Life 2 takes second time through took maybe 8-10 hours.
Well, Half-Life 2 for me, first time about 20 hours. To go
Well,
through.
that's second time
but,
through.
But in terms of like, if I wouldn't say Half-Life was necessarily a strictly storytelling game as opposed to Mass Effect, where I do think there's a lot more in terms of characters and development and plot going on there.
Mass Effect's one of these games where there is quite a lot of each of the characters do have their own story, and you can investigate that, and that's the whole point. Because the more story you uncover, the more loyal the player is to you, and the more likely they're going to make it through to the end, which is quite nice. But there was a leak of a Mass Effect 3 beta. And so they've got different modes you can play it in now, which are action mode, which has less story.
Cool.
Story mode, which has less action, and RPG mode, which is like the other two Mass Effect games, and the one that all true players must use.
Well, that's it. I'd like there to be that option.
Do you think so?
Yeah. Well, I think. I mean, look, admittedly, I see the challenge that they're sort of setting up that they're going to have to design 3 games in a sense, with a lot of common areas, but they're going to need to have points where it can hand over and you can switch between them.
I think it's things like it's essentially the same game, but it'll make decisions for you in the story if you play in action mode, and if you play in story mode, you might, I don't know, see those guys being shot or they just won't turn up.
But I do applaud any developer who can actually hand over more control to the player and how they tell the story as well. Although it is an absolutely terrible game, no one should ever play it. I mean, you'll see it for £3 everywhere. You have to click to blink. I'm, of course, speaking off.
Alone in the Dark.
Alone in the Dark actually plays their game like it was a TV series that you'd get on a DVD. So the game was split into like 8 episodes. Within each episode, you then had individual scenes. So a scene might be you go into a room and there's a locked door, and there's a puzzle to unlock the door. But if you didn't want to do that, you could skip to immediately after that door, and you can move on. It meant that you could, if you had the really crap part of the game, like all the driving stuff was harrowing.
So you just spent a couple of hours skipping your way through this piece of shit.
Yeah, but when you skip through, you were skipping through cutscenes and things like that. It would flash up the previously on Alone in the Dark, and it would fill you in on the gist of it, in the way that if you watched Lost, like the full season of it, you don't need to watch every single minute of it. You can actually just watch a couple of key episodes which have those flashbacks. Not the flashbacks, but the little intros.
I feel like I shouldn't have watched every single minute of Lost, I have to say.
No, it's one of those like deep regrets of mine. Like on my
Of your
deathbed,
life.
I'll be sitting there and the kids will be kind of hugging around. I'll be like, Kate didn't tell them about the fake beard glue, and they'll just be left to wonder what the hell that means.
Like, we have to go back. We have to go back. What do you mean? We have to go back in time and stop me from watching Lost.
We have to go back. The network wants another 3 seasons.
So what do we think would make a good story then? What kind of things are you looking for? I guess I'll open this gambit. That I think. I mean, I want something that is interactive, and what I mean that is that there aren't any cut scenes. So I hate any point where I feel like I'm going to have to put down the controller because someone is speaking or because the plot is being described to me. That's not something I'm interested in. I want something more like Mass Effect, where it's got those little quick time events built into it, where you can. It's kind of different in that it's not press A to kill. You use the triggers to do good or bad actions. So if somebody's talking too long, you can just punch them in the face and shut them up. But it makes you feel like you don't ever want to let go of the controller because you might be able to do something. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, first of all. I think.
No, completely agree. And I understand the challenge they have, because if they want to do something within the game, so many of these games come down to either kill or don't kill. You can only communicate with the world through violence in a crowbar if you're Gordon Freeman, or violence in a plasmid if you're the guy from Rapture, or violence in a sword if you're in Skyrim.
Did you ever finish Fable 2?
Never played any Fables.
Alright, at the end of Fable 2, there's a choice where you can kill the main villain, or if you wait too long, somebody else kills him because they're bored of him talking.
Okay.
So the choice isn't whether he gets killed or not, it's who does it, which is quite funny. But I was watching his sort of soliloquy at the end, and then he got killed. I was like, can't believe that, you killed that guy I've waited all my life to kill. I was gutted.
But that's obviously the temptation for them to then put all of that into a cutscene. So I understand it, but no, I don't like that. I want the game to tell me the story. I don't want the little movie inside the game to have it.
Yeah.
So really that kind of ties into, again, the idea of player agency. Classic example, of course, being Portal, where what you do in the game is you're walking around and you're solving puzzles in a story which is about someone walking around solving puzzles. So it kind of sits nicely within itself. It's not this disparate.
Yeah. But you don't actually affect the story.
You don't affect the story, but at least in terms of your...
You can't even really affect the solution to the puzzles. One of the problems I had with Portal 2 over the first one was that it was, like, even the solutions felt linear. It wasn't so much like Portal where there was a couple of different ways.
I mean, I think we've a lot of the stuff we talked about there was linear storytelling. We've almost skipped over, we say, more emergent storytelling.
So
I mean, that is
like
one which comes solely from gameplay then. So something like Minecraft, where there's no characters, there's no plot.
Haven't they added an update though? This adventure update where there is an end game and we can hunt dragons and quest.
I have no idea. I've not been on in a while.
Well, if you're not going to do your research, how are we going to do these podcasts? You meant to do a bit of background reading before I
skim read.
Skim read. That's what I do with your reviews, mate. That's what I do with all your writing.
Scroll down. 4 stars. Do not want.
But I think they have added an adventure bit in Minecraft. But spoiler, I'm planning on doing a Minecraft video feature soon.
Awesome.
And one of the things I'm going to talk about is that I'm going to show people what I've made, because that to me is a story. Anytime anybody showed me Minecraft, they've never gone, this is Minecraft, and you can do this, and you can do this. It's always, look what I made.
Show and tell.
It's always a bit of show and tell.
Yeah.
And there are stories like whenever I first started playing it, I built myself a little mud shack to stay alive, and then I turned it into a tower because that's what I wanted to do. And from the top of the tower I could see this cave, and I was like, oh, that's quite cool. I'll go on an adventure there when I feel a bit stronger. So meanwhile, I tunneled underneath my tower and worked my way through the seedy underbelly of the earth, and I popped out in the entrance of the cave. So I'd already explored it. I just got in from the other side. So there's loads of cool things like that. Like if you dig, you find a small cave, and then you'll find a waterfall on the side of an island. Or, sometimes you'll, chip through and find a massive pit of lava and nearly die in it. And I guess that is kind of the story.
You can actually come after playing it, and actually you can tell a story, even though one's not being told to you. Because of what you're doing in the game, you're able to tell one.
It's very difficult to to show it to people who haven't played it, though, because I know I showed my girlfriend pictures of it. It was like, oh yes, it's Minecraft, and she's like, why would you want to play that? I was like, someday I will show you, and you will know the ways to.
Yeah. Another classic emergent one being The Sims. Where, again, you've got these little rules that someone's set up and these little models that you can put in, but within that you can then put on your own layer of like, well, I'll make it of my old flatmates. And
I was reading about Sims modding quite recently, and The Sims 3 has a bit more story to it, so things do happen to your characters. But it's kind of contained within the family you're currently working on, so other people kind of get married and stuff in the background. But there's some Sims 3 mod where it's all being simulated all the time. One consequence is it makes your computer run a wee bit toasty. But the other consequence is that a lot more happens, so you'll see people getting married and having kids and dying and getting new jobs and all these interesting things happening. But
you could also go outside and see that in real time.
Yeah, but
boom.
But that way you don't get to watch pixelated people in the shower. You can't.
There's not as much woohoo.
There's much woohoo. I'm not even gonna dignify that with a response.
For what I say, it's like what I want to see more of in the future is the storytelling where, and I'm stealing this wholly from a Gamma Sutra blog, but the guy said that he wanted stories to be told like FIFA commentary, where when you're playing a game of football and it's like, oh god, I've realised that I don't actually know any names of any footballers at all. This is gonna go
That's
well.
Mr. Football, David Beckham.
All right, okay, yeah. So when David Beckham, passes the ball to Rooney, he passes it to Alan Shearer.
Shearer.
He lobs it up, and Gary Lineker goes up for a sweet cheeky header in. And David Seaman is also up there playing up front.
You're just, I know what you're doing. You're thinking back to your football sticker album in 1995.
But when you're playing the game, right? You're playing the game, and you've got this commentary coming over the top, and it's adding that sense of like realism to it. It's
Yeah.
binding it together into some sort of cohesive narrative. So
It also kind of breaks the realism. I remember I had this old game for Sega Saturn called Olympic Soccer, and because it was Saturn in '96, there only were about 3 lines of dialogue. So every time he tackled somebody, he would always say, "He took the man, not the ball." And then he would also say, "Well, they certainly won't be exchanging Christmas cards."
well, that's the problem.
And just those 2 things over and
The problem
over.
that so often there'll be certain phrases that will just constantly come up, like again and again and again. But you played Bastion, which used that and actually did it to tell,
Bastion was,
explore characters.
have you played it yet?
No.
Why do I write these reviews? Nobody.
You write it so I don't need to play it. That's the whole point, right?
I just thought I would leave
so it's for me. That's why I write reviews.
I thought I would leave a pause in there since nobody could see my face.
Ah, okay.
Can't see the single tear rolling down my cheek. Well, Bastion does things like, it has all the obvious things like, you walk into a bar and it'll say, "The kid walked into a bar." But it also says things like, if you think, "Oh, I'll smash up some of the scenery to see if there's anything good," and he goes, "Kid just smashes things for a while. He's just lashing out," and things like that. So it's
Maybe
very,
he sees an answer. Maybe he doesn't.
Exactly.
Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe there's no point to this, but it sounds good, doesn't it?
that's exactly what it's like. So it's or if you pick up a musket and a machete, he goes, "Oh, that's a good combination, a musket and a machete." But it's a lot. It's not as stilted as the Fallout ending. And okay, I guess it is a kind of artificial thing, but I think it works.
And that's one
really,
where
really
it does
well.
it through that voiceover commentary. But I feel that one that did it through the world was Left 4 Dead, and that again, it's something where it can be infinitely replayable. You can go through those missions, those campaigns and levels again and again, but you can have different stories emerge because the narrative's sort of being paced. And I'm understand that when I'm saying narrative here, it's also just the gameplay, really.
Yeah,
But
because it's got 2 levels of story. The actual story doesn't really change.
Well, the actual story really is just there's zombies. You need to get to this safety, and that's your motivation. And nothing else is really explored much. I mean, everything's just suggestive.
Okay, well, here's a good take-home message for this then. So, games have 2 types of story. There's a story that's overtly presented to you, and there's the story that you make for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so the best games are the ones that merge those 2 into one long, somewhat predetermined story that you make.
Yeah.
That's a good story.
The end.
The end.